The Healing Journey: Reclaiming Your Power Through Cultural Connection. I recently had the privilege of interviewing Charvell Price, a true visionary who is revolutionizing how we understand healing from racial trauma. Her work isn't just changing lives, it's transforming entire communities. What makes Charvell extraordinary isn't simply her brilliant mind or her innovative protocols, but her profound understanding that true healing must honor our cultural roots. She stands at the intersection of science and soul, offering a roadmap for those who have been navigating wounds without a compass for far too long. Have you ever noticed how we're taught to bandage our wounds before we've even acknowledged they exist? How we're expected to move through the world as if our pain is merely an inconvenience rather than a testament to our humanity? 3 years ago, a woman walked into a community wellness center in Chicago. She was a high powered executive, impeccable resume, flawless presentation, the kind of person who enters a room and immediately commands respect. By all external measures, she was thriving. But inside, she was crumbling under the weight of microaggressions, of being the only one in countless rooms, of carrying generations of unspoken pain. "I don't have time to fall apart," she told the therapist, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "People are counting on me." How many of us live in that same space, that narrow gap between breaking and breakthrough, between survival and actually living? That exhausting limbo where we're neither fully present nor completely absent, just enduring. The truth that Charvel Price's work illuminates is both simple and revolutionary. Healing isn't just about feeling better, it's about reclaiming what was always yours: your wholeness, your joy, your right to exist without apology. When we examine the data from the Healing Racial Trauma Protocol, something remarkable emerges. Participants didn't just report reduced anxiety and depression, that would be impressive enough. But they described something far more profound: a reclamation of self, a return to power they'd forgotten was theirs. One participant said, "For the first time, I could name what was happening to me without questioning my own reality." Think about that for a moment. Imagine going through life constantly doubting your own experiences, constantly wondering if you're overreacting when something hurts you. That's not just exhausting, it's soul crushing. It's a special kind of gaslighting that leaves you wondering if your pain even deserves acknowledgement. But here's where it gets interesting: the protocol didn't just validate experiences, it provided tools, mindfulness practices specifically adapted to honor Black experiences, grounding techniques that acknowledged rather than erased cultural context. And the results? Transformative. Because when you can finally name your pain without shame, when you can trace its roots, beyond yourself to systems designed without you in mind, that's not just healing, that's liberation. Now, I want to be crystal clear about something. When we say healing is your responsibility, but not your fault, we're not letting systems off the hook. We're not saying racism, discrimination, or generational trauma should be yours alone to solve. What we are saying is that your healing cannot wait for systems to change. Your joy cannot be held hostage by institutions that were never built to honor your humanity in the first place. This is where culturally responsive approaches become not just helpful, but essential. Consider what happened at a community wellness center serving primarily African American clients. Here was a space that didn't just incorporate Afrocentric values as a nice addition, they centered them. Storytelling circles, ancestor acknowledgement, cultural affirmations, elders as mentors. These weren't exotic additions to regular therapy. They weren't the multicultural chapter tacked onto the end of a textbook. They were recognition that healing happens in context, your history, your community. One client who had struggled with imposter syndrome for years described the shift. I realized I wasn't broken. I was disconnected from my ancestors, from my community, from parts of myself I'd been taught to hide. That's the power of culturally responsive healing. It doesn't just address symptoms, it restores connections that were severed, sometimes generations ago. But let's be honest, this work isn't easy. It requires courage to look at wounds we've spent lifetimes pretending don't exist. It demands vulnerability in a world that has often punished us for showing it. I'm reminded of a moment during a citywide workshop for Black entrepreneurs experiencing burnout and discrimination. One participant stood up and said, I've spent 20 years pretending I don't notice when I'm the only Black person in the room. 20 years pretending it doesn't affect me when someone touches my hair without permission. 20 years swallowing rage and calling it professionalism. The room fell silent because everyone there knew exactly what she meant. That silence, that moment of collective recognition, that's where healing begins. Not in pretending the wound doesn't exist, but in finally giving it air to breathe. And here's what's remarkable about these workshops: they didn't just help individuals feel better, they created ripples. Participants went back to their companies and advocated for policy changes. They created support groups. They mentored others. Individual healing became collective transformation. This is why community matters so deeply in the healing journey, because trauma isolates. It whispers that you're alone, that no one will understand, that your pain is somehow unique to you. But healing connects. It reminds us that our stories, while unique, are also part of something larger, something ancestral, something powerful. I'm struck by how a nonprofit coalition's trauma informed counseling approach recognized this fundamental truth. They didn't just offer individual therapy, they created ecosystems of support, peer circles where shared experiences could become shared strength. The results speak for themselves: increased retention rates among minority owned businesses, measurable reductions in workplace distress, and perhaps most importantly, a sense of belonging that many participants had never experienced in professional settings before. One participant put it beautifully: for the first time in my career, I didn't have to choose between being successful and being myself. Imagine that freedom. Imagine walking into spaces, professional spaces, personal spaces, without leaving essential parts of yourself at the door. That's not just healing, that's revolution. But revolutions don't happen overnight, they happen in small, consistent acts of courage, in daily choices to honor your needs, in boundaries that protect your peace, in communities that hold space for your whole truth. This is where many of us get stuck. We want the breakthrough without the breaking open. We want the transformation without the discomfort. We want healing without having to look at the wound. Charvell Price's work reminds us that there are no shortcuts, but there are supports, there are practices, there are communities waiting to receive you, not despite your wounds, but with them. The Healing Racial Trauma Protocol showed us that structured sessions validating lived experiences combined with culturally relevant grounding techniques can create profound shifts. Participants didn't just feel better, they felt empowered to speak up against injustice in their professional lives. The Afrocentric approaches at the Community Wellness Center demonstrated that when therapy honors cultural context, when it incorporates storytelling circles and ancestor acknowledgement, clients don't just recover, they reclaim, they reconnect with parts of themselves they'd been taught to silence. And the trauma informed counseling advancing social justice, it showed us that when we address root causes, when we build supportive ecosystems where shared experience drives both recovery and activism, we don't just heal individuals, we transform communities. These aren't just nice stories, they're roadmaps, they're invitations to a different way of being, one where your healing becomes a force not just for personal transformation, but for collective justice. So I stand before you today with a challenge to disrupt the very way you think about healing. What if the wound you've been hiding is actually the doorway to your greatest power? What if the pain you've been minimizing contains wisdom that could transform not just your life, but the lives of everyone around you? I challenge you to take one radical step towards your own healing this week. Name one wound you've been pretending doesn't hurt. Seek out a therapist who understands your cultural context. Join a community where your full humanity is celebrated, not tolerated, because your healing isn't just a personal indulgence, it's a political act. When you reclaim your right to wholeness, you create a ripple effect that touches everyone in your orbit. Your healing becomes permission for others to heal. Your boundaries become templates for others to establish their own. Your joy becomes evidence that another way of being is possible. In the words of one participant from the Healing Racial Trauma Protocol, I realized I wasn't just healing for myself, I was healing for my ancestors who couldn't. I was healing for my children who shouldn't have to. I was healing for my community who deserves to see what freedom looks like. That's the invitation before us all. Not just to survive, but to thrive. Not just to exist, but to flourish. Not just to heal, but to transform ourselves, our communities, our world. The revolution begins within, and it begins today with you. Thank you.